In this video, we are going to find out how far the new Xpeng G9 all-wheel drive performance can go on a full charge of battery at a constant 120 kilometers an hour. And maybe more importantly, we are going to compare the results in this test with other competitors like the Audi Q8 e-tron and NIO EL7. Will Xpeng's first large SUV impress in the real world as much as it impresses on paper? That and much more is what we're going to find out in the next 14 minutes. Finally guys, we are in the Xpeng G9, this being the all-wheel drive performance version. You guys for several months have been asking me when am I gonna test this car, and the wait is over because I finally have one on loan. So I don't have it for a full week, so I'm not gonna do all the usual videos I do, but I'm still gonna do a few cool videos here on the channel. So if you don't want to miss out on those videos, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and also sound that notification bell. And also, if you would give this video a thumbs up, that would be much appreciated. But today we are doing the range test, so we're going to find out how far this car can go on a full charge of battery. But the conditions today still cold here in eastern Norway, or I should rather say that we actually had a few days of really mild weather. We had like +6 degrees Celsius here for like a few days ago, but now we're back to really cold temperatures here. Nearing Hamar, it's like -12 degrees Celsius, so not very warm. Conditions though are pretty decent. We had a little bit of snowfall yesterday, but they seem to have plowed all of the snow out of the road. There's just a little bit of, damp and wetness in the road, but other than that, there's not a lot of snow, like this thin layer of snow, but not in the actual tracks where you're driving. So I don't think that is going to affect the range and the consumption of this car. Talking about consumption, we've been on the road for about 39 minutes now, and average consumption is 30.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which I don't think is too bad considering the temperature and the constant speed. We're going at 120 kilometers an hour or 75 miles per hour. So I'm not going to give you guys my full opinion on the G9 yet. I haven't driven it for more than a few days. I picked it up late Friday. Now it's Monday. I've driven it a few times through the weekend, but not a lot because I have been busy. But I can tell you guys right away that this is the best Chinese car I've driven, and by a big margin, because it doesn't have, the quirks and the weirdnesses and the faults and just annoyances of a lot of the other Chinese cars I've driven, like adaptive cruise control that does weird things, that does auto braking, that, just isn't smooth in the way it engages, in the way it, reduces or increases the speed. Some of these adaptive cruise controls in these Chinese cars, once there's a little bit of turn on the motorway, it reduces the speed like by 5 and 10 and 15 kilometers an hour. Here we're going through a weak left sweeper. It's keeping a constant 120 kilometers an hour. But you can hear from the bings and the bongs. Yeah, the Chinese love the bings and bongs, and this seems to be super sensitive. If I'm not, like giving a lot of steering force or input into the wheel all the time, if I'm just, holding the steering wheel, it will bing and bong at you, which is annoying. It may be a little bit because of the conditions that road markings aren't that visible, the way the light is hitting, the sun is hitting the snow and everything is just bright. I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt before I get to test this car, under normal, dry conditions, but it just keeps binging and bonging. Please stop that. Please stop it. It was working so nice up until now. Other things I just want to talk about in this car is also the steering feel. The way the steering is weighted just feels natural. It is so much better than the Kia EV9 I had on test last week, which just had weird steering. This is so much nicer and feels almost German in the way the steering is weighted and how it feels, how much feel it has. The last thing I want to mention that some of the Chinese cars, if not all of them, have been really bad at is these sound systems. They, talk about these sound systems with a lot of speakers, these sound systems with all of this, amplifier output, but they just sound terrible. Right out terrible. This actually has an impressive sound system, so I can't wait to talk more about that in my actual review of this car. So I just want to get all of those things out of the way, because a lot of people think I hate Chinese cars. I absolutely don't hate Chinese cars. I'm really fond of this car, and as I said, it's the best Chinese car I've ever driven. Okay, so we are now at our turnaround point here in Moelv. So we've covered a little more than 100 kilometers. This route is 216 kilometers. And thus far, halfway through this test, let's take a look here. 30.0 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. And as you guys can see here on the left side of the gauge cluster, we've covered 108.6 kilometers. So that average consumption is not low by any means, but considering what type of vehicle this is, the size of the vehicle, and also how cold it is outside, and also that we don't actually have, you know, dry roads, that the roads are a little bit damp, a little bit slushy, as you guys can see here, I don't think that is too bad at all. And according to the wind map, we did have a headwind on our way up here northward to this point of about 1 meter per second. So in theory, if the wind map is accurate, we should have a little bit lower consumption once we get back to our destination. But that's what we're going to find out now. So for me, it's going to be a little bit more than an hour, but for you guys, it's just going to be a second until we speak again. Okay guys, here we are back at where we started. So we're gonna take a right up here so we can exit to the Esso station. And then I think we're gonna try to go to these chargers. Yeah, because there is maybe one of the chargers weren't working before. So we're gonna take a look if that is working now, because these can deliver a higher peak charging speed than the ones over there. And all of these are just so busy nowadays with, yeah, it being cold in winter. But no, they are not. They're no. It's not. What? Maybe this one. Is this guy leaving or going? So while we're waiting, we can take a look at the average consumption, which is 30.4 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and we've covered 216.6 kilometers. And we're going to stop the timer here. It was a little bit late, so probably an hour and 54 minutes. And also, I'm going to show you guys that the car doesn't show how much percentage we have left now. It only shows us kilometers. But we can go into a charging menu here, up here, the battery. And then what we can do is that we can tap this, and then we can move this slider down here to see. No, we can't. We can't. So we just have to guesstimate how much percentage we have left. Okay, so we're now connected. The charger said we were at 19% state to charge. But the guy at Xpeng has told me that they have requested, they've spoken to the engineers in China who develop, you know, the software here, that they want a battery percentage indicator. Hopefully we're going to get that at some point in time. I think it's kind of weird that you have an electric car that doesn't tell you how many percentage your battery is, but okay, that maybe they do it different in China, I don't know. So this car has a peak charging speed of 300 kilowatts according to the official numbers from Xpeng, but journalists have managed even higher speeds. I heard something like close to 350 kilowatts, which is just insane. And we're getting 147 kilowatts, and that is pretty impressive, because what we don't do in this test is we do not precondition the battery. This car doesn't have manual preconditioning. Well, it does. It has manual preconditioning to a timer, so you can set the if I set it here, I can set the car to precondition the battery for a specific time. I'm not going to do that now. But it doesn't have, you know, a manual button where you just can press start, you know, preconditioning now, which is becoming more and more normal in the EV space. But what it does have is that it has preconditioning via navigation system. We don't do that in this test because for two reasons. First off, we do that in a different test called the long trip test, where we test the car on a long trip. In this test, we just want to see what speed we get after just passive heating, because not all cars have preconditioning, so for it to be a fair comparison, so we can, compare cars across the board. Another reason we also don't do it is because we do not want to have higher consumption in this trip than we would compared to other cars. Again, a car doesn't have preconditioning, so we're not going to use it, and we're trying to get the most range out of the car on this trip. So if we did preconditioning in this car and not in another car, this car would have higher consumption, and then the results of the range you get could not be as comparable as if we don't use preconditioning. That is also another reason we don't do it here in this test. But I think it's kind of impressive that we're getting 147 kilowatts at what was 19% stated charge with a super cold battery, it being like minus 12 degrees Celsius outside now. That is pretty crazy. Before we jump into today's results, I just want to give a huge thanks to today's video sponsor, Elton, the most awesome charging app if you live in Norway, Sweden, Finland, or Denmark, because one charging app with one map interface and one payment method will let you charge at almost all charge point operators in all of these countries. It is an immense tool while taking an electric car on a road trip. So if you want the best charging app on the market, if you want to support the channel, go to the link in the description box down below and download the Elton charging app from there. Now for the results. So to find out how far this car is able to go on a full charge of battery, we take the usable capacity of 93.1 kilowatt hours divided by the consumption 30.4 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and then subtract 3% in heat loss, which gives us a theoretical range under today's conditions of 297 kilometers. And you may be thinking, hey, that's not very good. Isn't the WLTP rated range of this car 520 kilometers? Well, that is correct, but you have to consider two things, which is very important. First off, this test is done at a constant 120 kilometers an hour or 75 miles per hour. At those speeds, you're not going to get close to any WLTP rated range in any electric car, because the WLTP testing is done in a mixed cycle where very little of that is done on the motorway, and I don't think it's done at anything close to 120 kilometers an hour either. So this test is much harder than what the WLTP test cycle is. Another thing to consider, which is the most important thing today, is the extreme cold temperatures of -9 to -15 degrees Celsius. This is the second coldest conditions, if I remember correctly, in this test we've ever had. We only had one day which we had colder conditions, and that was last week when we tested the Kia EV9. So if you want to see more extreme testing than this, go check that video out. So with all of that considered, I don't think that the consumption is half bad at all. I think it is actually very impressive. And another thing to consider, I checked the summer testing results of the Audi Q8 e-tron 55, which is this car, one of this car's main competitors. This is the same size as this car, and this has the same battery pack size if you go for the 50. Well, in the 55 test at least, done in summer temperatures, I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt in that video because it was so warm outside. 25 point something kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. For this car to have a little bit higher consumption than that car, only 5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers higher, in like minus or 30 degrees colder, that is impressive. I can't wait to test this car in the summer to see how good of results it will get, because I am pretty confident that this car will impress me even more, because this is impressive. This is impressive. And also the car itself is very, very impressive. This feels like a premium car. This feels like a true luxury car that can actually compete with the Germans. Like, of all the non-German premium SUVs, which also isn't like Swedish or from Europe, this is the closest thing I've ever driven. And that's saying a lot because I've driven most of them. So one last thing I want to talk about is that the cabin in here, once it was like -15 degrees, you could really feel it. So you could feel like the cold radiating off the windscreen. It felt really cold in here, and I was really inclined to put on my jacket, but I didn't. I just bared with the cold. I did not experience that in the EV9. The EV9 had better like cabin insulation than this car. So that is something to consider. But I didn't feel that before we were like minus 12 to minus 15 degrees Celsius. So I don't think that is something most people think to have to be concerned about at all. So guys, let me know what you think about the results of this Xpeng G9 in today's test. Do you think it's impressive? Do you think you could have done better? Let me know in the comment section down below. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please drop me a thumbs up down below. And for more car content, as always, please subscribe. See you guys later and goodbye.